You're listening to The Local Maximum, episode 293.
Time to expand your perspective. Welcome to The Local Maximum. Now, here's your host, Max Sklar.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. You have reached another Local Maximum. Today, joined once again by Aaron. How you doing today, Aaron?
Doing well. Glad to be here.
Another late night recording. Not quite 1 a.m, although it feels like 1 a.m. for me.
You scared me for a moment. I
yes.
got stuff to do after this.
Yeah. Time does fly. Okay. Well, we'll move ahead quickly. Do you think we will ever achieve the dream of a 20-minute episode?
I'm not holding my breath for it.
Okay. Well, today's episode has a clear theme to it. It's I would say the Twitter rant episode. So I've got 2 Twitter rants, and then I've got a probability distribution of the week, which I say is like a Twitter rant.
Are we still calling it Twitter and tweets, or
no? Well, we are, but it's not called that anymore. It's now
is
called
this going to
X.
be like people, myself included, have not started calling it Meta? We're still calling it Facebook.
Yes,
it's always going to be Twitter in our hearts,
right?
Whether those are warm or dark, stony places.
The difference is it's still Facebook.com and it's still Facebook the service. For Twitter, it's still Twitter.com, but it's not called the service anymore. It's called X. And so maybe at some point, if you go to Twitter.com, it'll just forward to like X something or X.co or something like that. So that hasn't happened yet. Once that happens regularly, and I'm not actually typing in Twitter to get to Twitter, like look at our links are still Twitter.
Yep.
Then I think at some point we'll have to start.
And it certainly
switching
seems like Musk has the vision of Twitter or X, nay Twitter, becoming a company that does much more than just the microblogging platform that was its original purpose. Much in the way that Meta and Alphabet have many different silos, but none of them have renamed their flagship product as part of their corporate rebranding. So
Right. So our first rant is about Jon Stewart, who we've talked about Jon Stewart in the Daily Show on this program before. I don't remember exactly when. Now I want to look it up. Did we screw up the notes?
I feel like it was brought up by him starting his podcast.
Yeah. Let's see if I'm surprised we didn't do this during research. But yes, okay, here it is. Episode 207, Max returns with priors. And where is the information on Jon Stewart? Discussion of political comedy and the return of Jon Stewart. Right. Well, that podcast didn't really go anywhere, did it?
I mean, is it still around? I don't know that it's had better staying power than Joe Biden's podcast. But my impression is it's still around, but I don't think it's taken the world by storm.
Interestingly, episode 207 also has the first mention of rational distributions, which we're talking about later today. So isn't that a great tie-in? All right, something about Jon Stewart and rational distributions. There's a connection there because when we talk about one, we talk about the other. So let's listen to this Twitter rant. This one is by E.O. in Lenihan. Okay, let me actually read this guy's name. It is my slow computer. Dr. Eoin Lenihan. He writes, Jon Stewart ruined a generation of truth-hungry kids. Those of us coming of age during 9/11 and war on Iraq were looking for anything outside of the MSN narrative, spinning BS. He popularized mugging off to the camera, using pregnant pauses and mockery to infer obvious stupidity instead of interrogating the facts and engaging in informed rebuttal. The show is highly influential, but it left its viewers unable to discuss politics in a useful manner. He is in no significant way responsible for the smug and moralistic tone of many on the left today. He's also partly responsible for the attitude among many of them that anyone they disagree with is simply self-evidently stupid, no facts required. He specialized in mocking and caricaturing conservatives, a trend we now see come to full fruition with the casual labeling as Nazi or white supremacist of anyone such people disagree with on even the most basic of social issues. That's his legacy in a time where a truth-hungry generation were desperately looking for someone to cut through the partisan MSN, mainstream media, BS. He molded them into smug, disingenuous, and lazy thinkers. That's according to someone who apparently calls himself a doctor but is an independent journalist. Okie dokie. All right. So, I mean, some of this is right. I think it's interesting, but I don't think it's entirely fair because I think he's giving too much credit to Jon Stewart to the development of the culture. I think the culture selected Jon Stewart for that particular time. And actually, that longer article that you posted in The Atlantic kind of shows why Jon Stewart came along at the time he did, because you had kind of these, a lot of these like faux partisan debates. Yeah.
Just a correction, it's from the New Atlantis, not the Atlantic.
Wow. Okay.
At a glance, those look the same.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe is there like kind of a copycat syndrome there?
There may in fact be like oh God, what was it? The company in Boiler Room that wasn't J.P. Morgan, but sounded an awful lot like it. Anyway.
All right. So so I think they say that Jon Stewart came along at the time because there were kind of like all these fake debates on TV. Not fake debates, but like, oh, there's going to be one person that is a Democrat, another person is a Republican, and they're going to kind of like say their thing each night. And he was trying to kind of break the mold there. The sort of like snarky situation that was popular at the time. I mean, I used to find it hilarious. Now I kind of look back at some of it. It's not so much Jon Stewart stuff, but I'm thinking like some of the Daily Show, like Man on the Street stuff, where it's like, we're going to go on the street and make people look dumb. And the most extreme example for that is Borat, which that's one of those things where I look back, I'm like, why did we do that?
Yeah, well, and the Daily Show certainly wasn't the inventor of that technique in that format, but you could say that they brought it much more mainstream. That it used to be, so we have to keep in mind where the Daily Show aired. It was on Comedy Central, and that was much more something that would have been in line for like some of their prank show type content.
Right.
But this broke out of that market. People who wouldn't watch that kind of show, or maybe they would watch that, but they certainly wouldn't share clips of that with colleagues and family members. It would be the type of thing that maybe it would get shared around the college dorm, but this was going much further than this. It had much broader reach, and so he took that, and by maybe applying it to a different context, carried it a lot further.
Right. Yeah, I also think in his early stuff he tried to be genuinely even-handed, and he was actually very funny. But what do we have today? Like, all of the copies are just incredibly partisan and bitter,
and many of them Daily Show alumni.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
much like SNL, birthed many film franchises, some which succeeded and some which didn't. The Daily Show birthed a whole slew of news commentary / comedy format shows, most of which I think have not been terribly successful. I mean, the biggest success would have been Colbert, and now his move on to the Late Show. But he's kind of morphed into the opposite direction, and that's part of what the article about how Jon Stewart made Tucker Carlson was pointing at is that he was almost simultaneously poking fun at the taking themselves way too seriously news reporters who were ripe for parody, as well as kind of the late night talk show host, super chummy with their interview subjects format. And I don't think much of what's grown out of that has succeeded.
Yeah, it's almost like.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's almost like, okay, if as the it's not the Atlantic. I keep on. We should write down what it is. The New Atlantis, as they say. If news opinion TV was so bland at the time, we now have the same situation with comedy or political comedy today. So it almost seems ripe for someone to break out. I feel like maybe someone should do a character based off the character, like a character based off of all of the Daily Show alumni. Just spitballing here, the character of the character. I think it could work. I think it could work.
If you break the fourth wall too many times, you run out of walls. I don't know. So two things you mentioned that that caught my ear. So one was that it wasn't so much that this was Jon Stewart's doing, that he was just the man that the culture selected for this, and that gets back to the whole great man theory of history, or more of a Howian fourth turning secular time marches on approach to history, and I think it's still very much an open debate on that when does the man matter and when does the moment make the man, but that's
right.
An interesting way of couching this. And I had a second thought and I've completely forgotten what it was.
That's okay.
Oh, I remember. So it was, you said that, when we were younger, perhaps back in our college days, Stewart and the Daily Show were a little bit more even-handed, that we thought they were funnier. And I'm curious how true that is and how much that is nostalgia and rose-colored glasses. Sure. I mean, I think there was always somewhat of a left of center lean.
Oh yeah.
My recollection is the same as yours, that he was much more willing or able to poke at both sides, and maybe part of that was a matter of who was in power during those eras. That during the Bush presidency, there was a lot of opportunities to take shots at compassionate conservatism and the neoconservative movement. There's a valid question to be made of whether he pulled his punches a little bit in the follow-on administration. But I'd be wary that we may be viewing the early days when we were younger and more naive and maybe more aligned with those views as being less contentious and less biased, just because we were blind to it in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was particularly aligned to his views, but I was like, oh, I could enjoy it. And so it's hard to do that today. I've definitely seen some older clips recently, and they do hold up sometimes, but I'd have to do a little more research on that. I was actually, I've been watching John Wilson's How To. I don't know if you've seen that. It's on HBO. He basically, it almost looks, I mean, I know there's a lot of people involved in the production, but it almost looks like it's like one guy living like in a dinky apartment in New York that going around filming garbage. It's got an intentional
homemade feel to it.
Yeah, going around filming garbage and trying to narrate a story while he kind of tries to tell us about his subject, but he gets distracted and ends up in a completely different place. But one of the interesting things about that show is how he ends up interviewing a lot of people who are really nutty, like real kind of nutcase type people, or people with like really niche interests that you wouldn't expect. And you're kind of laughing a little bit, but he actually seems to treat them with a lot of respect. And so it's sort of like the opposite of what you would get with something like Borat or something in the 2000s, where it's like, we're going to take the man on the street and then, humiliate them for our own entertainment purposes, which I now see as not a particularly nice humor. Not a particularly nice thing to do. Yeah, exactly. Which, and then the people watching are like, oh, all blah 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 are stupid. Everyone who thinks blah 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 is stupid. But just no, that's actually not a very good argument.
Well, yeah, there's a sense that certainly in the latter half of Stewart's tenure at the Daily Show, when he would invite people on for interviews, either directly with him or much more so for the correspondent segments, it was like, what did these people think? Like, how they must have realized that both given the format and the ability for these correspondents to cut the interview however they want, that they are going to be made to look an ass. Like, you have to be a special kind of delusional, which almost means that they deserve it, to think that you can outshine and go into a Daily Show segment interview and come out with the view you wanted to project, the message you wanted to send out, actually getting through, rather than you being made to look a fool.
Right, but I think a lot of people just didn't know what the Daily Show was, and it'd be like people from
maybe
small
early
towns
on, but
early on, yeah.
Especially with so if we're looking at a situation of senators or representatives, people who have staffers who are probably in recent college grads, somebody on their staff should have told them, "Hold up, man, this is a bad idea. Do not go in that room."
Yeah.
And nobody did, which I can't believe that they were that naive, but.
Yeah.
Maybe I just have too high an opinion of our elected officials, which is something I did not anticipate saying going into this episode.
It was a way to be kind of, it was a way to be kind of like socially oh, this is the way to get someone. And I now looking at that, it's not.
Yeah. Well, people rag on oh God, what's her name? Sarah Palin.
Right.
Much of it with good reason. But I think she was the one that coined the term, or at least popularized the gotcha media. And to an extent,
the gotcha lamestream media
was very much playing that game. He may not have invented it again, but he perfected that art.
All right. Yeah, I don't have any resolution here. This is just a rant. So let's go on to the next one, which is a rant about Scrum at work. Have you ever used Scrum, Aaron?
So not personally. I know that we use my company uses Jira, and I believe that they do sprints and possibly Scrum. But I'm not technically on the software team, so I am 1 degree separated from all that.
There are certain things I like about Agile, but Scrum seems to be when you take it way too far and you have all these ceremonies and different things that you have to do every week, and it's basically like the corporate the many corporate rules to keep things going. So let's read this rant. It's by Santiago. He teaches machine learning. Okay, he writes, "Scrum is a cancer. I've been writing software for 25 years and nothing renders a software team useless like Scrum does. Some anecdotes. Number 1, they tried to convince me that poker is a planning tool, not a game. 2, if you want to be more efficient, you must add process, not remove it. They had us attending, quote, ceremonies, a fancy name for a buttload of meetings, stand-ups, groomings, planning, retrospectives, and Scrum of Scrums." Oh, God, I remember the Scrum of Scrums. This was, by the way, this was Wireless Generation when I was there in the 2000s, and they were
big into Scrum.
Yeah, they were doing Agile Scrum, but they kept adding they added all these things, and some was good, some of it got way over the top. Let's continue. We spent more time talking than doing. We prohibited laptops in meetings. We had to stand. We passed a ball around to keep everyone paying attention. We spent more time estimating story points than writing software. Story points measure complexity, not time, but we had to decide how many story points fit into a sprint, 2 weeks. I had to use T-shirt sizes to estimate software. We measure how much it cost to deliver one story point and then wrote contracts where clients paid for a package of 500 story points. Management lost it when they found that 500 story points in one project weren't the same value as 500 story points on another project. We had many meetings to fix this. Imagine having a manager, a scrum master, a product owner, and a tech lead. You had to answer to all of them and none simultaneously. We paid people who told us whether we were burning down points fast enough. Weren't story points about complexity instead of time? Never mind. I believe in Agile, but this ain't Agile. We brought professional Scrum trainers. We paid people from our team to get certified. We tried Scrum this way and that other way. We spent years doing it. The result was always the same. It didn't work. Scrum is a cancer that will eat your development team. Scrum is not for developers. It's another tool for managers to feel like they're in control. But the best about Scrum are those who look at you in the eye and tell you, if it doesn't work for you, you are doing it wrong. Scrum is anything that works for your team. Sure it is. Okay, so that's that's quite a rant there. I loved how I remember doing, and they did this at Yodel too. This was poker for estimation. Like you'll all sit with all the tasks, and everyone would have a bunch of cards for like how long they think the task would take. Or in his case, you weren't even allowed to say how long you think it takes. You would just assign it story points, and then everyone would throw out their cards at the same time. And it was kind of like, yeah, it was fun. I don't even want to say it was fun the first time. It was fun maybe the first 2 times you throw out cards the first time, but after that it was just like,
so what's the mechanism there? Is it so everyone throws out their cards, everyone's made a different estimate prediction on how long it's going to take to do this. Is it whoever voted the shortest amount of time, they have to do it? Or you take an average, or what?
That would be hilarious if it's like you're bidding on it. No. I think
what is that mechanism called? Where and you see it a lot in like insurance and bidding. That to know that you're kind of spot on with your estimates, you don't want to win. You want to like consistently be coming in second, because you figure whoever bidded the lowest is underbidding. And you don't want to bid so high that you never get it. But if you're always in second place, then you're pretty damn accurate. Now, it means you don't get the business. But in terms of reliability of your estimates.
Average. Yeah. I think so I think what would happen is if there is a difference of opinion, then you would have to talk and reconcile it. So like you'd always be like, oh, if I throw out like a card that's like a lot harder, they'd be like, oh, you think this takes more work? Why do you think that? And then you'd have to answer for yourself. So that was not very pleasant. So
I've never had to do estimating in a formal context like that.
Yeah.
But that is always my least favorite part of any project. Is even if I have a very clearly laid out plan of steps A through Z of how we're going to accomplish this and what's dependent on what and what needs to be done, and then they come and say, okay, so how long do you need to do it? I'm like, well, hell if I know. I've never done it before.
Yeah. It's there is kind of an estimation process, but a lot of these ceremonies just go way over the top. And I think that poker is one of them. I think the stand-up, the fact that they had to pass around a ball, that gets old. Really, you know what the best stand-ups are?
I'm surprised they don't require them to have a conch show.
Yeah. The best stand-ups I've been at is, you've got your morning stand-ups and it's like 4 people and you just round up with 4 people. You don't have to pass around a ball with 4 people. Now, when they let that expand, like at some places, that's where I'm looking at you, Foursquare, to like 15 people, it gets to be kind of like, why are we standing around listening to 15 people? I can't like listen and help every single person. Like, when it's 4 people, you kind of, everybody can respond to everybody else.
That gets to a whole other subject of what are optimal team sizes.
I have opinions on that.
We recently went through a corporate reorg at work, and it's mean that certain people that were on certain teams are now reshuffled, and it's meant that a bunch of our meetings we've basically deep sixed, because now that there are people on 3 different teams that were in the meeting before, if we invite all 3 of those teams and all those people, now we've got 20 people in a meeting that used to be 5, and we're going to spend the whole time just telling each other what we're up to and not actually accomplish anything. So I could just as easily see it going in the opposite direction, though, with that kind of thing. Well, it's okay. Well, now we need to have all 20 people in, and so it's going to take us, instead of 60 minutes, it's going to take us 3 hours, and we're still not going to be any better off. Right.
I guess that I'm looking at the funny one is Scrum of Scrums, where it's like there always does have to be some, like if there's an update in these meetings, that there always has to be like some meta update for like the company overall. But I don't, I don't know if Scrum of Scrums is.
That sounds like a problem for middle managers and not for me.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what the Scrum of Scrums is, unless that's like a weekly Scrum. That's like the bigger. That's sprint planning meeting. But anyway, well, actually, one thing that I did like at Wireless was on a team we'd have like these monthly retrospective meetings where we talk about what went well and what didn't go well. And so long as there was a good facilitator on that, I felt like that was kind of helpful. So every once in a while, there's something that you could do that's helpful, like a quote ceremony, but it's just like, don't do any of the hokey stuff. Just like be cool. Okay. That's my take on it.
I will call out. So where is it here? was number 3. We were prohibited laptops in meetings. So not always a good thing, but I've seen a couple of things recently about how Amazon doesn't allow PowerPoints, and they have a very specific memo-based culture. I can see perhaps some benefits to that kind of an approach. Mostly because I've seen death by PowerPoint done in so painful ways. But I could see how, particularly if you use tools like a Jira or something like that, not having it in your Scrum meeting could kind of be counterproductive.
I feel like Scrum trainers was like the DEI professional of the 2000s.
Now, have you ever had to deal with Six Sigma?
No. What's that?
So that may have been kind of the generation before Scrum, but it was about process optimizing, and I don't know if GE originated it, but GE was big into Six Sigma. It got lampooned slightly on 30 Rock when Jack Donaghy came into the picture there, but it was same thing in that. At some companies, it was like, well, you must, within your first 2 years, get Six Sigma certified, and you're going to get your green belt, and then you get your black belt, and you're going to do a project. I remember hearing stories from people I've worked with that at prior companies that they had a Six Sigma project which involved them moving to a new tool, and then they had a follow-up Six Sigma project which involved them moving away from that tool because They proved that there was value in doing it, and then they proved that actually there's even more value in not doing it.
Okay, I do not follow this, Aaron. Six Sigma sounds very complicated.
I have mixed feelings about it.
Yeah. So I was actually talking to an engineer friend the other day about software engineering in the 2000s, about how when we used to use Java, and Java did not have like certain features, and there were all these like crazy frameworks that you had to work around, like Spring. There was like the Spring framework, and it was like, oh, you better learn the Spring framework. You want to put it on your resume, and it's like nobody cares about that stuff anymore. But which is good because I never liked that stuff. I don't know. I don't know what else to say about this other than sometimes you need a process, but don't go overboard. Life is about the golden mean. And
you said you have positive experiences with sprints and other pieces of Agile. So if you're stuck in a world of Scrum, don't abandon all processes, but maybe there's a middle way.
Right. That's what I think. Unless there are some people out there who think that there needs to be, who have very strong opinions about how this stuff would work, I'd like to hear it. localmaxradio@gmail.com if you'd like to weigh in, or weigh in on our locals, maximum.locals.com. Aaron, anything else on Scrum? Oh, wait, one more thing before we start. I think there was a clip in the HBO show Silicon Valley where they lampoon Scrum, or they parody Scrum.
I'm sure there was.
Yeah. But then I remember there was like a debate underneath it. Well, what they're showing is not Scrum. So, I mean, like, once you get into the religious wars of like, this is Scrum, this is not Scrum, it's just like, get me out of this meeting.
No true Scrum man.
I do prefer Scrum to DEI. I'll say that. So it's just pick your torture. All right. Anything else before we move on?
No, that's all I got.
All right. Great. Stop doing Scrum meme. Should there be? Is there one or no?
I haven't been able to find it, but
all right. So now we've got a segment.
And now the probability distribution of the week.
All right, folks, it is the probability distribution of the week. In keeping with last episode, 292, and of course, episode 207 from last year, or a couple of years ago, we're going to be talking about probability distributions that you can build over the rational numbers. Those are numbers that can be expressed as the ratio between two numbers, like 1/2, 7/3, all that good stuff. So these are theoretical because most of the probability distributions that we deal with in statistics are either like continuous distribution, like on the real numbers, like the normal distribution, the curve, or it's just like a discrete distribution, like a rolling of the dice, or the Poisson distribution that we went over and all that. All right, so one of the things that I think could be used, so these are theoretical, but I like to think about the practical applications that they might have. One of the other things that I think might be able to be used if we were to make a good distribution over the rational numbers is continued fractions. Now, a continued fraction is like a Twitter rant of natural numbers. Each rational number can be made into like a canonical continued fraction. So a continued fraction is like a plus 1 over b plus 1 over c plus 1 over d plus 1, et cetera, et cetera. And so it ends at some point. And so eventually it terminates. How does it work? Well, the idea is like the first number that you pull out in any fraction is like the whole number part. So you make the fraction, like if it's 4 3/4, like the first number would be 4 plus, and then 3/4. It's like, well, then how do you make 3/4 into something? Well, it's 4 plus 1 over 4/3. You just flip it around. Follow me so far?
Okay.
Right. So when it's 4 plus 3/4, the fraction part is going to be between 0 and 1. But when you do 1 over that, 1 over 4/3, the piece on the bottom is then going to be greater than 1. So now you could pull it apart again and then keep going. And by doing this, every single rational number has like a unique continued fractions. There's some way to like repeat a number, but there's like a canonical continued fraction for each rational number. So that's a pretty, and it's, it's not based on like base 10 or anything. So it's like a very natural way to create, to kind of organize fractions. So and eventually this terminates at the end. So it's like like it might be a plus 1 over b, and then that's it. So 4 1/4 is a very simple one. So it's some kind of like finite string of numbers. So I think this means that each rational number can be encoded as a sequence of natural numbers. So for example, let's take the encoding 1, 2, 3. Okay? So it would be 1 plus 1 over 2 plus 1 over 3. So 2 plus 1 over 3 is 2 1/3. Take 1 over that, 1 plus that. It ends up coming out to 10/7. This is a very hard one to do in audio format. So hopefully you could tell me if there's any questions along the way. But I would say, don't worry about actually understanding it fully in your head, but I'd encourage you to all look it up. All right, so how can this be used to make a probability distribution? But I think you take two distributions over the natural numbers, one for the size of the continued fraction and the other for the distribution over the value of the number for each number, and then you could get that distribution. And I think that would be one way to do it. And I don't know what the properties of that would be, but I think that would be interesting. But another thing that's interesting about that is there's a deep connection between continued fractions and the Fibonacci sequence. And the golden ratio. So how familiar are you with these things, Aaron? I would venture to say they cover this at MIT.
Yes, I'm familiar with the Fibonacci sequence, and I've certainly heard of the golden ratio. I had to look it up to
They probably
to
cover it.
see
They probably covered it in high school.
that the symbol for it is indeed
Yeah.
phi, but I didn't remember
interesting.
that off the top of my head.
Yeah. So Fibonacci sequence, for those of you who forgot, is every number is the sum of the previous two numbers. So it starts with 1, 1, and then it goes to 2, and then 2 plus 1 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 8, 5 plus 8 is 13, et cetera, et cetera. So you also want to look at like successive ratios of these. So, a ratio of consecutive Fibonacci numbers would be like 3/2, 5/3, 8/5, 13/8, et cetera, et cetera. And so those approach the golden the golden mean or golden ratio, like 1.6 or something like that. I mean, if you do the opposite one, if you do like 2/3, 3/5, 5/8, then it's the 0.6 something. It's an irrational number. But those ratios approach these things. So it turns out that those ratios of consecutive Fibonacci sequences always have the same type of continued fraction. It's always in the form 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and then it ends with a 2. Now, you can't end with a 1 in a continued fraction, because if you end with a 1, you're simply adding 1 to the number right next to it. So you might as well just put them together. So it's 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2. And then if you want to talk about a infinite continued fraction, the infinite continued fraction that's 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, repeating forever is the golden ratio. So that seems like it has a pretty special place in the world of continued fractions, if that makes sense. So I think this is fascinating. And by the way, another interesting thing, like, well, why is this 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1? What does that have to do with Fibonacci? And so you could kind of see it in a certain sense, like let's say you have 5/8, right? 5/8, those are 2 Fibonacci numbers. Okay, 5 divided by 8. Then what happens when you add 1 to it? Well, it's 1 plus 5/8, and then the 1 becomes 8/8. And then when you add that, the numerator becomes 5 plus 8. So now you have 13/8. So you literally just did the Fibonacci jump right there using arithmetic, which that's pretty cool. And then you take 1 over that, and you get it back into the original form and all. So I think you teach this to middle school kids, high school kids, and it's this really interesting kind of mathematical explanation. So I think there's a world where we can make these types of like Fibonacci sequences more likely as a prior, as a distribution over the rational numbers. I think there's something here. I'm not really sure, but what's interesting is there is something called like a periodic continued fraction, which is a continued fraction where like a certain number or sequence of numbers repeats infinitely. And so that's what the golden ratio has. It's an infinite repetition of ones. And you could think of any rational number ending with an infinite repetition of zeros. And it turns out that every number that can be expressed in this form is actually a quadratic number. So that means like it's irrational, but it could have like a square root or something like that. So maybe 1 repeated would be something that would be very likely in this system, because you could have some system where some probability distribution where you're like, you have 2 finite sequences of numbers, the stuff at the beginning that's not repeated and the stuff at the end that is repeated. And then each of those would have probability distributions on them. And so if the stuff at the beginning is empty, that's going to be a pretty likely one, right? Because you have a certain probability of ending. And then if the repeated one is just the digit 1 that repeats over and over again, that's short. So by what's that law, Occam's razor, that's going to be a very likely one. And so that would make the golden ratio very likely. So it would put certain quadratic numbers in like a higher plane than others. And that could be a really interesting way to like categorize the likelihood of numbers or the interestingness of numbers. I think there is some really cool mathematical explorations that could be done here.
Interesting.
All right, that's all I have to say about it. Any questions for the class, Aaron?
I haven't fully grasped this one, so I'm gonna have to think on it a little.
All right, great. Well, you got questions? Go on the locals, maximum.locals.com, or email us localmaxradio@gmail.com. Have a great week, everyone. That's the show. To support the Local Maximum, sign up for exclusive content and our online community at maximum.locals.com. The Local Maximum is available wherever podcasts are found. If you want to keep up, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. Also, check out the website with show notes and additional materials at localmaxradio.com. If you want to contact me, the host, send an email to localmaxradio@gmail.com. Have a great week.
Feel the power.